Good evening, school board members and the Wauwatosa School District community. My name is Luke Pinion. I am your Chief of Pupil and Family Supports. Tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about processes surrounding investigations, specifically how we move through various claims or allegations of bullying, harassment, discrimination, possible threats, and suicidal ideation. It's important to note that our ultimate goal is to keep students in the community safe, healthy, and learning. We take all claims of bullying, harassment, discrimination, suicidality, and/or threats seriously, and we have processes and procedures in place that are aligned not only to the federal and state laws, but also to our school board policies and our administrative guidelines. These serve to cease the behavior and to support students accordingly. Where I want to start us off, and you'll see in our guiding document, is really from the parent or guardian experience. Specifically, what should they expect when they bring forward these types of concerns? First, we'd ask, really starting with the person closest to the concern. Oftentimes that might be an individual in the building and/or the school leader or principal. When filing a complaint of this nature, it is important that you understand what to expect from that school leader when they are responding to and listening to the concern. First and foremost, that school leader will receive the complaint or the information and follow up with you with a written notice of investigation into the matter. This may include information, or should include information, about other potential policies and/or guidelines that might be applicable based on the nature of the concern. That conversation in person or over the phone should articulate that as well, and then you can see that in writing afterward. This will make more sense as we really unpack some of these areas of potential investigation. In that email, the administrator would also outline any immediate protective or mitigative, meaning measures to kind of stop or cease the behavior, that could be put in place throughout the course of the investigation. Oftentimes, it's common to feel a sense of frustration, like nothing's being done, but the investigations can take and span several days or weeks of time. But it is important that families understand what can be done immediately to support that child and/or to protect them in the meantime until that investigation is completed. The administrator at that time would also articulate the timeline of the associated investigation, which is often based in policy or law, and the timelines might look different depending on which area of investigation we're looking into. Ultimately, when the investigation or investigations are completed, the administrator will reduce findings in writing for the complainant. So on the front end, you should understand what paths are available, the timelines associated, what support or mitigations in place, and what's being done at the end of it to move forward. Again, our ultimate goal is keeping people safe, keeping students learning. I think it's important to stress that this requires not a predetermined course of action for all students, but really a careful assessment, collaboration, and critical judgment of the circumstances of the incident. It is case by case in terms of what we do moving forward and how we move through after the investigation is completed. What works for one child may not work for another student. So it's really about exercising that critical judgment based on the facts of the case and what can or may need to be done to cease the behavior and to protect and support students. Next, I want to shift into the other part of this, which talks about school board governance. We have policies 1100 for district organization, 1210 for board and superintendent relationships, and 1230 for responsibilities of the superintendent. It is important for our board members to also understand that they may receive complaints or grievances, whether that's in an email, over the phone, or at the podium at a board meeting. It is important for anyone, be it a board member or a staff, to route those concerns accordingly. When in doubt, the building principal. Otherwise, we have compliance officers listed in some of the matrix below or the table that articulates the different processes. At the end of the day, we want to make sure the right person is receiving that information and that complaint so they can follow the processes and guidelines that we have outlined to properly look into it. This brings us to our table, and we want to take just a few minutes to unpack each of these areas and the particulars within each one of how we move through it. The first is bullying. Not only is there Wisconsin state law in statute 118.46 that talks about the right to report bullying to a teacher or administrator, but we also have policy 5517.01 and the associated administrative guidelines. Those guidelines articulate a three-step process that our school leaders must follow when responding to allegations of bullying. School administrators do have the responsibility to investigate all bullying complaints in alignment with those policies and guidelines that we referenced. And then on the heels of that, if a parent is dissatisfied with that investigation, they may ask for an appeal or a review by a district administrator. I'm going to read the definition of bullying, as I think it's important for our community to understand this. This is deliberate or intentional behaviors using words or actions intended to cause fear, intimidation, or harm. Bullying may be repeated, doesn't have to be, and it does involve an imbalance of power. That imbalance of power is an important key piece that the school administrators will look for when looking into bullying. Imbalance of power may be things that are visible, such as physical size of the student, or the grade level at which they're in, or the height. Other times it's not as visible and involves more investigative action, such as social status and or popularity of a student. Sometimes it's the number of students. So they really look at what that power imbalance is to determine if it meets the definition. Regardless of if bullying does meet the definition, what is most important is that action is being taken to support students and to cease the maladaptive behavior from happening. You'll also see various tools, training, and guidance that have been provided to school administration to assist in fulfilling and realizing this policy in practice. Not only do we provide annual training to administration and deans by the Division of Pupil and Family Supports, we also provide numerous additional opportunities throughout the school year for review, discussion, and standardization with our associate principals and our deans of students. We've also created a template from our division that helps the building administrators move through the investigation and ensure they're covering all parts of the investigation that are necessary and asking the right questions and determining if it meets the definition, as well as assisting with that communication back to all of the individuals involved in that complaint or investigation. Additionally, legal counsel provides annual training to all of our administration, both at the district and school level administration, around bullying, harassment, and discrimination, with a particular emphasis on supporting our students with disabilities and special education populations. Of course, and you'll see this in all of our areas, we have our Speak Up, Speak Out anonymous tip reporting line that we continually encourage students and or community members to utilize when they may have information that could be concerning for us to follow up on, and that's an anonymous way to do so. Lastly, in this area, and you'll see this again carry through to all the areas, we've developed formal guidance and processes for students with disabilities who may be involved in safety investigations. This is important to note that those guidelines apply whether the individual with a disability is the alleged perpetrator or the alleged receiver of that bullying. So we have processes and guidelines in terms of how to support students, how to move through those plans when that happens. And then in regard to oversight and accountability, we do have a mechanism now that we didn't have in years past for quarterly tracking by school within our division, so we understand how many bullying investigations occur and at what levels they're being rated in looking at that level of risk. How many were substantiated, how many were not, and what kind of actions are taken as a result. We'll then move into harassment, which is a nuanced process that we do receive training on. There are, again, not only Wisconsin laws, such as Wisconsin Administrative Code PI 9.02, Parent 9. There's also Policy 5517 for student anti-harassment, as well as an accompanying administrative guideline. Definition is any threatening, insulting, or dehumanizing gesture, use of data or computer software, written, verbal, or physical conduct directed against a student based on one or more protected classes. And then the definition further defines kind of what that might look like. Again, we have tools, training, and guidance not only for staff, but also for our leaders. We have annual, what's called Vector, which is our online module for various trainings that occur. For staff that's required, that includes staff-to-staff harassment, staff-to-student harassment, in Title IX as well. Again, legal counsel provides annual training to all of our leaders, and we offer other opportunities to standardize that with our associate principals and deans of students. Also, as we have compliance officers that are indicated as those who really oversee the process of investigation, we receive additional training from legal counsel as those who are named as compliance officers, as well as those who might be tasked with helping out in an investigation. We continually consult with building leaders, and when I say we, I mean the Division of Pupil and Family Support, as they receive different complaints throughout the year to make sure they feel supported, that they're routed accordingly, and that we're using the right processes and communication as we move through them. When it comes to oversight and accountability for harassment, we do have the Office of Civil Rights, who requires annual data collection. And for more than 5 decades, the Office of Civil Rights has captured data on students' equal access to educational opportunities to understand and inform schools' compliance with the civil rights laws enforced by the Department of Education for Civil Rights. That moves us to discrimination. Discrimination, several, again, federal state laws, such as Wisconsin Administrative Code PI 9.01 or PI 9.02, parent 5. For discrimination, this again is managed by the district's compliance officers who are identified. This is unfair, prejudicial treatment of people or groups of people based on characteristics protected under state and federal law. Again, our policy aligns to those laws, and our guidelines then help articulate how to move through that. Similarly, as bullying and harassment, we receive our annual legal counsel and training, and our compliance officers also receive additional training on how to move through these investigations as the officer or as someone who might be investigating under the direction of the compliance officer. We consult with building leaders as they move through these types of complaints. And then again, we have our Speak Up, Speak Out tip line, as well as formal guidance and processes for students involved in these types of investigations who may have disabilities. That moves us to threats. Act 143 has been in place for some time, and that is really a law that makes sure and requires anyone who has a belief of a potential threat to be reporting that. We also have policy 3362.01, threatening behavior toward a staff member, and policy 8462.01, threats of violence. We do utilize Vector, as I spoke to before, to make sure staff meets the requirement of Act 143 and are trained accordingly. We also leverage the Department of Justice threat assessment protocol and process, and we are tracking the data in terms of how many threat assessments are completed, what level of risk they're associated or deemed to be, and then how we make protective measures moving forward. Again, I can't stress enough, one prescribed course of action is not safer than really making the assessment, understanding the facts of the case, and using your critical judgment to move through that safety concern. We work closely with the Wauwatosa Police Department in responding to threats. And again, we have Speak Up, Speak Out, and formal guidance and processes for students with disabilities who might be involved in these types of threats. We have our quarterly tracking by school to monitor how many threat assessments and the level of risk associated by school. And then lastly, in our table, we have suicidality or suicidal statements that might be made by students. Another very serious area of concern that we need to promptly attend to. We have Policy 5350, which articulates information about student suicide, as well as the accompanying administrative guidelines. Our student services team members have been trained and are positioned to promptly assess and respond to any instance of suicidal ideation that we may hear about, learn about, or be told directly by a student. We've developed over the course of the last 2 years an evidence-based suicide risk assessment guide, as well as a severity rating scale. All student services are not only trained in their programs around responding to suicidality, but have also been trained on these tools specific that are being used in Wauwatosa school districts. Speak Up, Speak Out can also be used as a mechanism to report concerning behavior or suicidality. And again, we have specific provisions and considerations when it comes to students with disabilities and how we may support them through their IEP and our 504. These data are also tracked quarterly by the school district. I would be remiss if I didn't share some of our outcomes that are connected to these processes, and to assure not only the board but the public that we are following these processes when we know about them. And yes, sometimes things may fall apart, or at the school level something might not have been heard the way it was intended to be delivered. We can come in and then make that right and make sure that we are following our processes that we're promising to follow and that we're legally obligated to follow. We're maintaining high expectations for producing positive outcomes and improving safety for all across our system. And we're happy to report in just a few slides you've seen here for this presentation and in this document that we're moving in the right direction. Not only have we had a 36% reduction in overall major discipline referrals, and when I say major, meaning behaviors that involve the student needing to be removed from the classroom, but you'll also see that students who've had multiple major discipline referrals or multiple suspensions also as an indicator of recidivism, has decreased as well across our system. The last piece of data I wanted to speak to is our violent behaviors that do result in suspension. These are really key indicators of safety throughout our buildings. And again, from the 22 to 23 school year and to the 23-24 school year, we are moving in a good direction in terms of reducing violent behaviors across our system, though certainly we have not arrived and we still have work to do. And then lastly, I really wanted to end with other outcomes that we utilize at the end of these types of investigations, whether it meets the definition or not. What do we do about it, or what are some options that we have utilized? This can also often result in training or retraining for staff or administration. That could be at an individual, a small group, school-wide, or district-wide level. Oftentimes there might be some level of student separation or scheduling that occurs. IEP or 504 plan support. Special education mediation may be an option when needed. Also, intentional skill building for students that need lagging skills taught. Again, could be one-on-one, small group, or various tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. Sometimes alternative placements or programming are utilized, and other interventions as deemed necessary. And then I will end on just really the important point that there are no magic words or required forms when these types of complaints come forward. We are not about putting barriers in front of our students or parents to ensure safety is considered and assessed and that we're promptly responding in alignment with law and policy when it comes to these areas. We do not want to put up more barriers or hoops to jump through for parents. Our job is to listen, process, and really make those paths available to parents. When it's on the front end, it sounds like I'm hearing this. Here are possible paths, we might look into it, and really working with them when it comes to what path makes the most sense as we investigate it. Again, no magic words required, no routing them through any form. We will look into complaints regardless of time lapsed and really consider implications that might still be lingering even if the complaint is very old. And although we really work at these at the individual level and really make case-by-case decisions and judgments, we try to also focus on some of the root cause factors versus temporary solutions that just sort of patch that situation. We want to get to the root, understand patterns and trends, and really get to the bottom of why things like this might be occurring across our system and what we can do systematically to really get to the bottom of it. I welcome your questions as you may have them as you review this information and listen to this presentation, and look forward to the discussion on August 26th. Thank you.